Okay, so what I'm not here to do is to try to do a color grading tutorial because there's a lot of them on YouTube, right? But what I am seeing, and because I'm watching tutorials myself and I'm trying to figure out why are these guys taking so much time to get out of log when all they have to do is a couple simple steps that I've been lucky enough to kind of pick up, right, through other means. So I'm also going to show kind of what the importance of lighting is in some of these scenarios because what looks blown out to you isn't blown out, especially if you're trying to color grade. So let's start. What we're looking at is actually live footage, right, of a black background that is not lit. On the histogram, far left side is shadows, far right side is highlights. And so and right here's the mids, obviously. So if you look, everything's black, so everything's pushed over to the left. What you're looking at is a shutter of 1/50th because we're running a frame rate of 24 frames per second. The aperture is wide open. The ISO is at 100. So now if we look at this example, right, ISO is up to 400 and these other two kind of measurements are still the same. But if you look at the histo, it's pulled the amount of color information a little bit over to the right. It's because now there is a little bit more information. And so you don't want everything pushed all the way to the left, or else there's nothing that it's going to be able to be available to you to process and post. So with quite a bit more light on the subject, right, you can see that exposure looks good. And you might think, oh, this might just be blown out. So you're going to be tempted to sit here and take away light from your subject, when in fact, what you need to do is trust the histogram. So if we look, now we've got a situation where we're running an ISO of 800. This is on the Canon R8. And that sensor for video, which is different from doing stills, actually has a native ISO between 800 and 3200, which means that it can capture the most dynamic range and color information between the ISO of 800 to 3200 when filming video. And when we look at the histogram here, you notice that this scene is well lit, almost to the point where the black looks blown out. But look at how much more information is available, color information, to the histogram. So all I'm saying is, don't be afraid of lighting if you're going to grade in post. Obviously, if you're going to film just like this and leaving it alone, you're going to want to get it closer to what the final product is that you want. But if you're going to grade in post, you want to give the sensor and the program as much color information as you possibly can. And so now you can see that this file is in log, and the subject actually looks like they're a little bit blown out. And this might be counterintuitive information from what you're looking at on the screen in the monitor in the viewfinder, because what you're going to have available to you in post is not going to be what you're seeing on your viewfinder or your screen right now. So now if you look at the color card here, and it's good to use a color card, you've got white, you've got gray, and then you've got your black, but the black looks washed out, just like the shirt and just like the background. And so now let's look at this original log footage of this interview that I was working on. This is log, so obviously it looks a little bit washed out because the sensor has captured as much information as possible. The scene is actually very well lit, because my intent is to color grade this. So one of the things I'm seeing when I'm looking through these color grading tutorials is that these guys are putting way more information into the footage than they really need to work with. And so what it does is it makes it harder to pull the colors in the directions that you want. So we're going to start with this standard footage. We're going to be using the RGB color chart. Okay, so one thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go through your clip, and you want to see what is the range of color information that clip contains. Okay, so as I go through this clip, you'll notice that curve down there, this area, is moving within a pretty well-defined range, right? So for all intents and purposes, all of this color information here in the highlights, you don't need. All of this color information in the shadows, you don't need. So one of the tricks to quickly get from a washed out log file to something that you start to work with is, first, you want to constrain the range of color information that's available to you. So you go in your shadows and you drag this over to the far edge of your shadows, and then you look at where your highlights are actually going to actually be recorded, and you constrain that. Now our log file is looking much closer to the right color space. But when we sit here and we compare it to something like a final product of what we're trying to do, you see that they're still very different. You can see in these clips here that they're very different, right, in general. So we have to figure out how to arrive at this type of image. So now that we've taken this first node, and first thing we've done is we've constrained the color space, the next trick is to go back and to white balance it. You can do it in another node, or you can do it in the original node. I prefer to do it in another node, but one of the keys is to actually use a white card in the scene so that you have something to measure against. But once you use the sampler, you can see the scopes moving around on where all of your color is. But in this particular scenario, we now see that you've got all this color down here that is out of bounds, but it's not going to be used in the clip because we're just using it for testing purposes. So the first thing you want to do is you want to sit here and unlock the RGB from each other. Find anything in the scene, if you don't have a white card, that you know is white, sample it, and in this scenario the white balance is almost near perfect because the NAND light that we're using, the key light, is a 5500 K in color, and pretty much gets us there with straight footage, right? As well as the automatic white balancing on the camera itself. So now I'm going to look at the gray. I'm going to sample the gray, and after sampling the gray, you'll notice that each individual color has been separated in this chart. You take your green, you take your white, you take your blue, and you get them all on the same horizontal line so that your grayscale or your white balance is very neutral and equal, right? And after you do that, you lock all that back together, you go back to your clip, and you run through your clip, and you'll notice that the color information is not, that the sensor has captured and the camera has captured, is not deviating from the range that you've set up as the bounds. And so once you have this basic tenet of getting out a log, one, right? Two, white balancing the footage, you can now go add a node and start getting to the more creative part of what your footage needs to look like. So in this situation, I'm not going to go into the adjustments I made here on the color wheel, but I created a node just for changing saturation. And so now we're close, but we're not quite where we want to be. So I fixed the saturation in this clip, and now you can see that the blacks are much more black. The black in the hair is much more black. The skin tone looks, pretty close to what we're looking at. So a well-lit scene is still able to pull what we're looking for. And now I have this new node that gets me to the stylistic look that I want to arrive at. And in this scenario, I take this node and I apply just the things I want here out of the color wheels to get this final look I'm looking for. And that's it. That's the basic tenet of the whole thing. Constrain the color information, white balance it, and then get to the stylistic look that you're trying to get. So basically that little trick has allowed me to take almost any log footage and get it to a color space and white balance very quickly.